All right. So here's a picture, as I was saying, of one of the first groups of workers, and you can see at this time they're all men. At that point, only men were invited into this program. They're all from Jamaica, and they're all dressed for success. And this is taken in the Niagara region. So basically what happened in this period was farmers in Canada were looking for a program to enable them to import foreign workers to help them harvest their crops at that time in Ontario. And they argued that based on looking at other countries, that other countries like the United States and Western Europe and Australia were bringing in migrant workers at the time. And they argued to the Canadian government that local labor simply wasn't up to doing farm work anymore. The labor they were able to attract was leaving the farms, and they often would just want to get paid, and then they wouldn't stay for the rest of the season, and their harvest was at risk. So they argued that to be competitive and to stay in business, they needed a foreign labor force that could be essentially compelled to work every day that they were needed, and then when they weren't needed, they would be sent home again. So finally in 1966, the Canadian government acquiesced and allowed this program to begin as a pilot program. It's called the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program. So this is the first group of workers, and later on it expanded to other provinces. Here's an early picture of it expanding into Quebec. And since then, it's really taken off. So from that first year, where there were just a few hundred workers, we now have about 50,000 seasonal agricultural workers in Canada. And it gets a bit more complicated from there because there's a few different programs that have started since in terms of the temporary foreign worker program that also bring in agricultural workers. But the main program is still the seasonal agricultural workers program. And in this graph, well, it's hard for you to see, it just shows you the main participating countries in agriculture that are temporary foreign workers. So Mexico is today the #1 sending country, followed by Jamaica, and now we have also Guatemala, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Philippines and Thailand. So it's really branched out in terms of geography. And this is part of a trend across Canada that has seen more temporary foreign workers and fewer new permanent economic immigrants. So you can see the red lines here are the temporary foreign workers, and the black lines are the permanent immigrants. So it's really changing the composition of our immigration system, when what we're seeing is more and more people coming in across the economy to work on temporary visas. So bringing it back, our discussion back to the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program, which will be the focus, I think, for all of us today. This map is a little bit outdated, but you can see that the majority of workers have been coming through this program to Ontario. And then the Ontario specifically, the red and orange areas are those with the highest concentrations of workers. So you can see that we're really sitting in the middle of the hotbed of migrant employment. So each of those red areas has 2,000 to 5,000 workers. So Essex, Haldimand, Norfolk, and Niagara are each employing many thousands of workers each year. And so our local food system, especially the crops that are labor dependent, so fresh produce, are really dependent on these foreign workers who come. So this idea of a local food system is challenged a little bit. We all talk about not wanting to import our foodstuffs from afar, but the fact is we're importing our labor from afar to produce the food locally. So it's a bit of a contradiction there. So briefly, the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, the acronym there is the SOP, has been often touted by the Canadian government and the other participating governments as a model program. Some of the reasons for this are that they say the workers coming into the program benefit from the wages because they're unable to attain wages like that in their countries of origin. The farmers in Canada say without this program, their operations couldn't exist. Many of them have told me that in interviews, that they require this group of workers who really wants these basically jobs that Canadians are rejecting in a large part, and under the conditions that are being offered. So the farmers say without this program, some of our farms wouldn't be able to remain viable. So they're basically saying that this is an essential program for them. The other benefits of this program are that migrant labor is happening all over the world. And in many contexts, especially in the United States, it's happening in a way without legal documentation. And that poses a lot of risks to the workers, and their rights are limited. So one of the benefits of this program is it's legal. The workers arrive safely on an airplane. They don't have to go through any kind of dangerous border crossings. When they're here, they have access to rights such as health care, workers' compensation. They pay into taxes, they pay into employment insurance, they pay into pension plans. So all of that benefits Canada because we're getting some of the tax revenue, and in fact they're barred from receiving employment insurance benefits, so they're subsidizing the system for Canada without being able to receive those benefits. Definitely the workers who I've interviewed over the years, and I've visited their villages in Mexico and Jamaica, have shown me how much this program means to them in terms of supporting their families. So just to give you one image, this is an image of a home where a Mexican worker grew up with his 10 siblings. This is his daughter. And here's the home that they've built today. So you can see these two homes are on the same land. And they've moved from essentially a shack without windows to a beautiful home. And so many of the workers who come here, every year they come, they build a new room in their home, they finish a new part of the house, they send their kids to school, and they rely on it just to support their families and lead a more dignified life. And so many of the workers show the houses under construction that they're building with the money they receive here. But it's kind of a contradiction because there's so much demand to enter this program, and here's the Ministry of Labour in Jamaica where workers are applying. There's so much demand to enter this program that it really, and to stay in the program, there's so much desire to stay in the program that it really enhances workers' vulnerability because they're so afraid of losing their position and they know they can be easily replaced, that their rights can easily be abused. They're disempowered from accessing their rights. In part, this is because their right to be in Canada depends on that relationship with their employer. The employer requests them back year after year. The employer can fire them and cause them to be sent home. And so if your employer is asking you to do something that is either unsafe or unhealthy, or if your employer is abusing you in any way, but you rely on that relationship to support your family, you're in a much more vulnerable position in the fact that you can't feel freedom in speaking up to that employer, knowing that you're going to lose everything. You're going to lose your livelihood. You're going to lose the opportunity to build that home for your family. And so at the same time that this program brings great benefits, it also generates vulnerabilities. And that is in part the way the program is designed. And I know that Jennifer will talk a little bit more about this, so I'll leave it there. But certainly we could make some policy changes to improve the empowerment of workers. Before workers come to Canada, they undergo detailed health exams. And when they arrive, they are not welcomed as immigrants. So even those who have been here for 10, 20, or even 30 or 40 years are never given the chance to immigrate unless they slip through and marry a Canadian. Typically they're barred from that opportunity. So despite the fact that their labor is valued and needed, they are not treated as welcome immigrants. And the crux of the problem is explained in this worker's quote. He says, there are some bosses that are good, but there are other bosses that are totally horrible. The well-being of their workers doesn't interest them. I don't know why. I guess we are like disposable machines to them. They work us hard until we wear out, and then they replace us with others. So what's happening here is that some employers are excellent, and Jennifer Fenning is a wonderful example of an excellent employer. And if you go to her firm and speak to her workers, as I have, the workers she employs as I have, they will tell you, we work for the best employer. And so the problem is not that all employers are abusing workers or that all employers are endangering workers. The problem is that some employers are, and that the system doesn't protect those who are in those vulnerable situations. The other problem here is that because workers can be basically cycled through and replaced with other workers, when workers become sick or injured, they're often just sent home. There's this idea of being disposed of. So even though they have access to health care in Canada, when they get too sick or injured to work, they're typically fired and sent home, where they no longer are able to access the healthcare system. So that's the direction my research has taken, and I don't have time to get into it, but I'll just let you know if you have questions that is the major problem that I've been focusing on over the years. With respect to living conditions, it's quite variable, and Aaron's film is going to talk about that, so I'm not going to get into that either. But what I do want to point out is that the living conditions are often not, they're monitored by their employers. So in this photo, for example, you see there's a sign saying no males are allowed. So in this instance, a female's dwelling is being monitored. And in this photo, in Spanish, it says that there's been a security company hired and is watching workers, and if they return after curfew, if they have guests after curfew, that the privilege to receive guests in their homes at all will be removed. And right next to that is a broom, Golden Broom Award for having a tidy home. So what this sets up is the situation of paternalism that really crosses the line, because these are adult men and women working in Canada who are being told that they can't come and go from their own living condition, their own dwellings at certain times, which is highly problematic. Okay, so I'm gonna skip through a bit of this because I don't have, I want to leave lots of time for everyone. Just to quickly point out that there are a lot of work risks related to agriculture, and when workers are sick and injured, they're often reluctant to seek medical care, in part because of that relationship I talked to you about with their employer. There are also other healthcare barriers, including, for example, language barriers. This 2011 crash occurred in Hampstead, just 20 minutes from here, and it killed 11 workers, including 10 migrant agricultural workers from Peru. Does anyone remember hearing about this crash? Yeah, so this made media attention, but because there were so many workers killed at once. But what I would argue is that there are workers being killed or being maimed or injured every single year that aren't making the news because it's happening on a case-by-case and individual basis. And so the country paid attention briefly to this situation with this crash, but every year workers are suffering without any attention. Okay. So I want to just end by saying that it's not all doom and gloom. There's been a lot of improvements over the years in terms of groups getting involved with this issue, documentary films that have been made, support groups, meetings, the fan club that distributes fans to workers in hot bunkhouses, community dinners and workshops. There have been legal challenges to try to get agricultural workers included. They won the Inclusion in Occupational Health and Safety Act, which they were previously denied access to, but they lost the bid to gain collective bargaining rights. I particularly want to point out Justice for Migrant Workers, who has been a leading advocacy group, leading various marches and events along with migrant workers in partnership with them. There have been health projects, lots of clinics reaching out to workers to help improve health and safety issues. And this year there's been a review of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program and a lot of recommendations being made. We're still waiting to see how that pans out in terms of actual changes, but there's hope that there may be some improvements on the way. And this is my friend Aaron, who's going to show you a clip of his film. Should we do the film now, or should we do Jennifer now? Okay, we'll do the film next. So the film really shows the variations in living conditions. Did you want to say anything else before they start the clip?
Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. As I think it's okay. As Janet mentioned, one of the characteristics of this program, I would say, is the contradictions. So there's many contradictions that just you can see when you are like living with them, sharing with them. Because at the beginning you can just assume that it's a very good program because of the income that Mexicans have every, it's not the best, but for them, because of the currency in Mexico is not very good, so the salary is good and they appreciate. But don't you just discover the contradiction when you go to the fields and when you observe and when you talk with them. So I'm gonna present like 11 minutes from the movie, and then you will see this contradiction related with housing conditions. And at the end we have, if you have questions, just feel free to do.
Great.